Welcome everyone to the first weekly status update call of the MakerDAO Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling core unit. Today is January 14th. We'll be looking at the 2022 strategy and the objectives and key results that the SES team has been working on during our offsite here in Palermo, from which we are joining. If we have a look at our agenda first, it's always good to start a new year with looking back a little bit. So we will quickly revisit the background against which the Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling core unit has been created last year. We'll recap our mission, vision, and strategy, and with that in mind, we will then have a look at the 2022 strategy and the objectives and key results that we've been defining and outlining as a team. So going back to the beginning, when the Maker Foundation first started decentralizing, we were thinking how we could scale a decentralized organization. Scaling centralized organizations is a pretty well-known recipe. First, you start with a small team, then the team will grow, and as the team grows, people will start to specialize, and then ultimately these groups of specialists are broken out in separate teams, which then form the hierarchy of the organization. Of course, the management hierarchy within a centralized organization has a number of important functions. In general, organizations mostly try to deal with the delegation challenges. So in three words, we need to get alignment, autonomy, and accountability in an organization, so that even as the organization grows, everyone remains working on the same goals, pushes the organization in the same direction, and are held accountable to the work that they are doing. In order for that to succeed, we need autonomy, because as we get more and more people in our organization, it's impossible to micromanage everything. And with enough alignment, it's possible to give people autonomy and still push in the same direction. So going top down in the management hierarchy, typically we have the goals that are defined, such as a mission, vision, and strategy that is broken down in objectives. These objectives are passed down through the team's hierarchy, and the necessary capital is allocated for these teams to work, and then the work that they do is through that same reporting structure evaluated. Bottom up, the teams are delivering their key results. They are, of course, contributing their expertise, and as I mentioned, they are reporting on the work that they deliver, so that that can be evaluated and that can be held accountable. In a decentralized organization, things scale up differently. We start from the same beginnings. It's decentralized or not, you can always start with a small team of people. You will have a few coordination problems, but as the team grows and the specializations break out, then things start to change. So it's no longer a hierarchy. We no longer have the management lines of reporting, but instead we have a network of different teams that interact and coordinate with each other. And of course, this is a recipe that is not as well known as scaling up centralized organizations. And this is the reason why we created SES. We defined as our vision that we want to sustainably grow the Maker protocol's moat by removing barriers between decentralized workforce, capital, and work. Basically figuring out analogous to scaling up centralized organizations, but in this new context, how can we scale up our workforce? How can we allocate our capital? And how can we make sure that people are working on the right projects to deliver value? Our vision around this was to support this decentralized, effective, and scalable economy on top of the Maker protocol, so that we continue to push forward its growth in a sustainable manner. And we've identified early on three elements of that. We define that we should have the best and most successful onboarding experience for new participants, focus that also remains today, and that we need to make sure that we have a high retention rate, ideally the highest retention rate in the industry. We want to allow everyone to find the capital they need to work on the best projects, and best projects we define it as the projects that optimally drive the protocol's growth and those that are most fulfilling for its participants, because you need people to be motivated and excited about the work they do, definitely as they have the degree of autonomy in a decentralized organization. We also need resilient safety mechanisms, because a lot of autonomy also comes with a number of risks. If everyone has a great degree of freedoms to do what they want to do, then we need to just make sure that we put the necessary safeguards in place so that no critical mistakes are made. So mistakes aren't an issue as long as they're not critical mistakes, as long as we're learning from them. So on the one hand, we want to allow for rapid innovation and experimentation, but on the other hand, we need to be careful that none of these mistakes are critical and would result in protocol failure. So this was our mission and vision as we defined it in the beginning. We are not changing any of this. I think we did a pretty good job of, from the start, identifying the right direction of the team. And yeah, we're starting against this background, the objectives and key results for 2022. What we also did in the beginning is define our strategy, how we would go about identifying these scaling bottlenecks and then removing those barriers between decentralized workforce capital and work. And the strategy that we defined was that we would do a continuous opportunity and risk assessment, looking at the challenges that we're facing in the DAO, identifying the scaling bottlenecks and prioritizing those and keeping a project backlog. SES then conducts the necessary research. We do data collection and modeling. We explore different frameworks to deal with these scaling bottlenecks. And as we formulate these solutions, we can't implement them all ourselves, so we need to then delegate. And delegation happens through our incubation program and through various other mechanisms that we have been using. All this is supported by our funding or budget for sponsorship. So, for example, the incubation teams that go to our program, they are financially supported typically, and we also have the possibility to allocate grants and other sponsorship to encourage the kind of work that we would like to see to address the scaling issues of MakerDAO. All this is combined with an advisory function, so we help others to continuously improve. We do a lot of thinking around accountability and auditing, and are trying to champion best practices and transparency. So all this, once again, is pretty much unchanged. So 2022 as well will be very much along the same lines. We've had our team workshop here. So this, for 3 days, we've had workshops and discussions. We've identified the challenges in 2021 that we want to work on. One of the main ones that we identified is that the incubation program, while it was successful, needs to become more efficient, and we want to scale this up so that things can go faster. This should be possible with all the experience that we've gained and the lessons that we've learned. We want to improve DAO-wide core unit collaboration, because the DAO has grown from just 1 core unit to 19 today. And this is a size where we need to seriously start thinking about how these different core units collaborate and work towards common goals. We are also at the point where auditing and quality control are becoming much more important. We already did some work on this in 2021. I want to continue this. And the ongoing challenge of working in an environment where we don't really have the authority to force people to do things in a certain way, that requires a very good education system so that people generally learn and become better and start following recommended practices, for example. So this is a challenge of education, which is much more important in a decentralized environment than in a centralized one where you can just command and control. And then the last one, ongoing challenge remains recruitment and onboarding. We already did a lot of work around this in 2021, but in the new year, we also want to continue that. Yeah, this is just a organizational overview. So we work with objectives and key results. And what I want to talk about today is the number of objectives that we defined for 2021. So going by the challenges, the first objective that we identified is a restructuring of our incubation program and our grants. As I mentioned, we want to scale it up, make it more efficient, and essentially improve the throughput of the number of teams that we can onboard into the DAO and make that go faster. We identified education and onboarding. So this is a very focused initiative that we will start to create educational materials and improve the onboarding in the ecosystem. Yeah, so we'll talk more about it in the coming slides. The third objective is an ecosystem performance dashboard that we are planning to build and launch, which is based on data that we already started collecting and new data that we plan to collect and turn this data in information, actionable information for anyone who wants to assess the performance of the MakerDAO. Then we have our ongoing objectives, legal risk mitigation. So that too, we worked on quite a bit in 2021 and will continue. And at the end of last year, we did quite a bit of work, mostly together with people like Luca, Will, and others to start restructuring the real world assets core units and make it a more decentralized structure where the real world assets core units can also further grow. So that too will remain an objective in 2021 to build that out and continue to support it. If we look at the first one, the objective to restructure our incubation program and the grants. Looking back at 2021, the way that our incubation program was structured was in 4 tracks. So we had the business model track, or the business model module, as we called it, the people module, the operations module, and the education module. Teams would join the incubation program, and we would have weekly meetings with the teams where we work with them on an individual basis in very intensive work sessions, which would tackle these different topics. For example, help them define their own mission, vision, and strategy, products, services that they're offering, make sure that they could hire the right people, that roles and responsibilities are defined, that their operations are properly organized, and that they have the necessary background, the education that is needed to properly run a core unit in the MakerDAO ecosystem. And then if all that through the sessions that we've had with them is finished, this culminates in the submission, of course, of their core unit MIPS. And as such, we have 3 graduated core units today. So that's the development and UX core unit, the SideStream auction services core unit, and the Immunify security core unit. We have 2 more who are in the RFC and formal submission phase, the TechOps core unit and Maker Talent. And we have 5 more core units who are currently enrolled in the program. So some of them are the real world assets core units that I already mentioned. So real world assets compliance, real world assets portfolio, and real world assets legal. But we also have the Maker Academy, which is a new core unit that we started working with late last year. And then the Chaos Labs core unit who are working on improved testing infrastructure for the engineering teams. There are also 2 core units that are in some form of reset. So we, before we had the current Maker Talent core unit, there was a V1 which didn't work out in its original concept, so that we had to give a reset. And then there is a second core unit that we introduced, which was the boot node core unit, which would help to build out the graph infrastructure for Maker. But this one has for now been put on hold because the business model that we tried to work out turned out to be incompatible with the service provider company. As grants in 2021, we worked on different projects. We've worked on the project Sandbox, which has looked at the challenges to do parallel smart contract development and created some mechanisms to deal with that. We have had a similar project which basically tries to do the same for real world assets, so to enable more parallel work. We called it Real World Sandbox, and this is the one that has led to the real world assets core unit restructuring plan. We've had the grant from Colby, who has done research into range polling, so how you can do range polling on the blockchain. And then we have had a couple of grants that are related to legal topics such as KYC, AML compliance, the EU Crypto Initiative, which is a regulatory group, and then the last grant isn't legal. This one is more internal, a review of our own communication processes, and yeah, Sarah has been helping us also on the call now to improve those within the SES core unit, so that we can apply the same practices in the wider context in the DAO. So this was 2021. I think the whole setup very much succeeded as it was intended. The grants program hasn't reached the level of clarity that we originally intended, but nevertheless we've had quite a few good grants projects that we've done, and the incubation program I think is generally seen as quite successful. But as we mentioned, we would like to look into the future, how we can further scale it up and onboard more core units faster into the ecosystem. So how will we do that? We have set a number of goals in 2022. Of course, we want to graduate the current incubation teams that are still in progress. This doesn't change. But in parallel, we will start working on a redesign of the incubation program, and the changes that we'll make, they're quite fundamental. So we will change the program in that we will start focusing on a number of focus areas, or tracks as we call them. And within these focus areas, we will define a number of challenges or projects that the different core units could work on. So an example of these tracks are listed below there. One track could be specifically for legal core units. Another track could be around Marcoms, design, community development, and developer relations. So broadly speaking, community and communication related topics. And then the third track, for example, could be auditing and quality control. So these are focus areas that probably require multiple core units to come into the ecosystem and further solve the many challenges that we are seeing. And we would start by structuring the new incubation program along those tracks. And then the trick that we would apply to scale up the program is basically to start working in cohorts. So every track could have up to 5 candidate facilitators with relevant background related to the focus area. So for example, the legal core unit track would have a number of people with the intention of becoming a facilitator with a legal background. And we would use the existing material that we have from the incubation program of 2021 and improve the quality of the educational material so that it enables better self-learning. So throughout last year, we've had many meetings where, for example, we would work with the different core units in our program and repeat ourselves quite a bit. So with every group, we kind of went through the same material. We had the same discussions, and on the one hand, this gave us a good opportunity to learn a lot, to gain a lot of experience, and definitely give tailored feedback, which is quite important. But on the other hand, there is a lot of double work. So what we would like to do instead is improve the educational material we have, make sure that it is good enough so that people can go through it by themselves and let's say learn 90% of the knowledge that we would otherwise teach them in these individual sessions, and learn it by themselves, and then use the sessions where the five candidates would work together to have discussions and further work out their concepts for their core units. So this would be optimizing for more self-learning, for learning from candidates who will be working on similar core units as your own, and then still maintain that aspect of individual feedback, but only there where it is the most efficient. And this would also follow a fixed schedule and really would be quite similar to, for example, university courses. So this is quite a revamp of the program that we have today, but we believe that it would have many advantages and would help us to scale this up systematically and dramatically. A second element that we would combine this with is a new bounty program. So as I mentioned, our grants program hasn't really reached the clarity and focus that we would have liked in 2021. And that's why we also want to rework the grants program and instead launch a bounty program. And the big goal there is to unlock ad hoc contributors, because MakerDAO is quite unique in the sense that it is very good at attracting permanent contributors, but ad hoc contributors, they're almost non-existent. And this is the exact opposite of most DAOs in the industry. Most DAOs, they are a loose collective of ad hoc contributors, and that's about it, with few permanent contributors. If there are permanent contributors, typically they're working for a foundation similar to the Maker Foundation, as it used to have its centralized structure. MakerDAO is very good at basically having that permanent workforce in a decentralized setting with the teams and the entire of the core units and the entire workforce that we've built throughout the last year. But now we would like to go a step further and also unlock the potential of these ad hoc contributors. So how can we do this? Now, one thing we learned over and over again is that there are many people who would like to contribute to Maker, but they don't know where to start. So what we would do in the context of this new bounty program is identify, to start with, a number of challenges and projects that they can work on, that these people who want to contribute, that they can work on. So a good example came up recently, which was a proposal to reimburse lost DAI that is from time to time accidentally sent to the DAI ERC20 contract, which is a mistake. If you do that, then today it means you lose your DAI, but there is a technical solution that could reimburse that lost DAI. Now, this is a nice project that we definitely support, but the question there is if we want to allocate the limited time of the protocol engineering core unit to build a module like this, which would mean that they have to deprioritize other important work on the roadmap. Now, this is a good example of a project that could be done by an ad hoc contributor, someone with the right background. They could contribute this project. They could be rewarded for it, and that wouldn't necessarily mean that they would have to work as a permanent contributor in a core unit. Of course, if these projects are valuable enough, are important enough, then we can attach bounties to them to further incentivize contributions and participation. The crucial thing is that we support this by the other team that we've mentioned, education and onboarding. The main reason why we don't have ad hoc contributors in Maker today is probably not the fact that they don't know what to work on, even though that's a big hurdle. But the main reason probably is the steep learning curve. So we need to support this effort by high quality education, educational materials, and good onboarding support. And this is, in other words, the exact same thing we need to scale up the the incubation program. So that's why these things go really well together. And we already mentioned, we have a number of core units in our current incubation program that can help with that. So we are working with the Maker Talent core unit and the Maker Academy core unit to create this platform, this education and onboarding platform that new contributors can then use to much more easily contribute to MakerDAO. Also last year, we did the X-ray project, which looked into the awareness, onboarding, and retention of developers in the MakerDAO ecosystem. And a lot of valuable information and insights was gained from that research. And we want to make sure that we can now apply that, because it's one thing to have insights, but if it stops there, then that is not very useful. So we need to make sure that we now act on those insights, and this is also an opportunity for that. The next initiative is what I just mentioned, the education and onboarding. So we produced a lot of material last year. So for example, SES had in total 43 weekly status update calls. Each one of them are documented, so you can watch the recordings, you can consult the presentations. We have supported and organized a number of other community calls. So, for example, the core unit launchpad sessions, of which there were 22. The CUT, which ones are it? Core unit tools, 11 sessions, 2 Maker Explorer sessions, and 2 Lex Maker sessions. We didn't do just these calls. We also launched our own blog, so ses.makerdao.network/blog, with a number of articles and good content, which we will further build on throughout this year. And of course, we created a lot of content in our incubation program to support the program as the core units went through them. And then we had the grants scholarships, which also delivered content not by the SES members ourselves, but by the people that we gave the grants. So what we want to do in 2022 is step this up a bit and further optimize our communication strategy. But the most important thing is we want to make this a cross-core unit collaboration. I already mentioned this. We will be working with the Maker Academy. We will be working with Maker Talent and others to push forward education and onboarding in the DAO. The biggest chunk of work from our side is that we want to do that significant quality upgrade of the incubation modules resources. So the modules that we've mentioned, the business module, the people module, operations, and also legal and general education, we want to rework the materials that we already have and significantly improve the quality so that these become real self-learning resources that do not require our continued attention to educate and train people. So we'll do that by better materials in terms of more in-depth theory, more examples, exercises, and then quizzes and self-tests that people can use to really master the material. And all this, of course, would help to further enable independent contributors, whether they be facilitator candidates, part of the new incubation program, or indeed these ad hoc contributors who would work on the challenges and programs that MakerDAO community thinks are worth working on. So we had two objectives so far. We have the new incubation program and the bounty program. We have the educational and onboarding initiative. And the third objective is an ecosystem performance dashboard that we are planning to build. So in 2021, as I mentioned, we did the X-ray project. We conducted a whole bunch of expert interviews. We did a very successful developer ecosystem survey with over 700 responses. The results of which are still being worked on and will be published soon. The other work we did also added to these insights, these data insights about the DAO and the core units and how they perform. So, for example, we created our budget transparency tool, the MIPMAP, as we've called it, which charts the different multi-sig wallet setups of the different core units and tries to create more transparency there. We helped developing a budgeting framework and an auditing framework to help core units to stay on top of their finances and make sure that there is transparency towards the DAO, and that these expenses are also audited so that we know that we are spending the money on the budgets, the right budgets that were approved by the community. So we've been working on all these different initiatives, which basically produce transparency data and information, and which are really essential in building out an auditing function in the decentralized organization, which is absolutely necessary to replace the management hierarchy in a centralized organization. So the management hierarchy usually does the quote-unquote auditing, even if we don't call it that, but every manager will always evaluate the teams that they're responsible for. And in a decentralized environment, this auditing function is largely a replacement of that. So what are we planning to do in 2022? We want to bring all this together in the development of an ecosystem performance dashboard. So we will create a data model that will represent the DAO, so the operational side of the DAO, with, for example, the different core units, very practical information like their, for example, the GitHub repositories that are responsible for, maybe they have a Twitter account, maybe they have a website, the links to the relevant MIPS, the links to the budget statements that these core units publish, and all this available in data so that we can, we can process it, we can summarize it easily. And we will merge that with the extensive information from the X-ray developer ecosystem data collection. So this will become a powerful tool as we bring all this together. The dashboards will not just be a user interface. In fact, we plan to take an API first approach so that we can further support automation and make this data accessible for other core units. For example, the strategic finance core unit will be using the data from the budget statements to create the summaries that they create manually today and create them instead automated from this database. For the UI, we don't plan to start a big new project ourselves for this. We will work instead with a third party, and any additional data analytics dashboards that we develop internally will be embedded in this third party UI. So we're very much looking forward to that. Believe that this will be a invaluable resource for anyone who wants to assess the performance of the DAO. For example, our delegates and other people representing the interests of MPR holders. Then the last two objectives I'll go through a little bit faster because they're not really new. The legal risk mitigation continues. So in 2021, we mostly focused on practical cases. We developed the core unit setup and the payment flows, and we started drafting a legal review process for MIPS. We did quite a bit of work around the self-insurance fund that we started the discussion around I believe halfway 2021. And then we had various grants initiatives that we already mentioned. So in 2022, we plan to finish the self-insurance fund. So this will still require some time as we have to collect the different offers from different candidates, and then further work through a community proposal and put everything in place to make the self-insurance fund a reality. We will do work on an upgrade for the core unit legal structure, potentially with an on-offshore structure that would allow for legal wrapping of core units, which would allow them to better mitigate and isolate the risk through incorporation. Today, this is to a certain extent already the case, but we want to have a more structured approach, especially as it comes, for example, to multi-sig signers and other roles in the DAO that require special attention. On the regulatory front, we'll continue with the initiatives that we already started, and hope to be able to summarize that and bring the results back to the DAO, which hasn't happened so far. And then the MIPS review process that we started drafting, want to iterate on that until we have a broad consensus that this will be a good improvement, and then push it forward to ratify it in the community as well. And then the last objective is the real world assets core units restructuring. This is the one that we already talked about a lot. We have done the real world sandbox report, or at least we have allocated the grant so that Luca Prosperi could do the research that he has contributed, and based on that report, we are further supporting the new structure of these real world assets core units. So there will be a real world assets compliance core unit, which will be separate from a real world assets legal core unit. And then as a third element, we will help to bootstrap a new specialized incubation program, which is separate from the one that SES runs, specifically for real world assets portfolio core units. So there too, we're just continuing with the work that we set out to do in 2021. And with that, this is a full overview of our strategy as we've defined it for 2022. Of course, all this is more than one quarter work. What we are currently doing is identifying the bits and pieces that we will be working on for Q1. And we'll make that available so that people can see what the first priorities will be that we will be tackling. So I've been talking for a long time. I hope that everyone was able to follow and that it made sense. We have some time for questions and comments now. I can't imagine there are no questions or comments after all this material.
Hey, congratulations on the 2021 success, and thank you for putting together this presentation. Good stuff. I'm a big proponent, as you know, of creating DAI network effects. And one question I had was with regards to product-driven viral growth of DAI itself, or Maker as a protocol. And I noticed you mentioned you're going to look to incubate Marcom's design. So I was just wondering what SES is thinking about as far as creating that, what I think is a missing piece, which is product-driven viral growth of DAI itself.
Yeah. That's a very good question. So Marcoms is not something that we have particularly been focusing on. Of course, we followed the struggles in 2021 to create a new core unit specifically for Marcoms. There were a number of external players that wanted to join. This didn't work out, and yeah, we were left with this vacuum and need for a Marcom strategy. So the product-driven viral adoption of DAI, this is an example of one of the challenges or potential projects, as we would define them, for people joining the incubation program. And so if I go back to the slide about it, so you see here that as we would set up these different tracks, we would start by collecting a number of potential projects and identifying challenges in the DAO that these candidate facilitators can consider for their core unit. And so yeah, what you described, I think, is a very good example of that. So we at one point will reach out and document this idea, and then make sure that it gets discussed by these candidates. And chances are, if they find this is a good idea, then they'll be able to work on that, and maybe this turns into a core unit, or maybe you know, the idea is reworked into and has some role in another core unit. So that's basically the way that we would tackle that. In this case, because we don't have any research projects within SES internally, right? So we try to then leverage delegation and engage other people to work on this. Does that answer your question? I think people may not be able to unmute. So sorry, Frank. I'll feel free to unmute.
Yeah, it does. And I appreciate you know, thinking about this, and I'm pretty sure you guys have already since 2021, the earlier part. And I guess also I wanted to, maybe I missed it, but I'm also a big fan of going to a decentralized infrastructure setting for MakerDAO, right? Like, I would like to see, obviously, maybe it's wishful thinking, cloud computing for DeFi and for Web3 be more simplified, where it becomes decentralized and is autonomous and unstoppable, right? So, and I know we've spoken about this, but you mentioned earlier that last year you tried to onboard something similar to the graph, and it didn't work out. But going into 2022 and beyond, what are your thoughts on that? And if you did show it then, I might have missed the slide. Are you going to try to re-bootstrap that graph, or a cache type of structure where you are decentralizing some of these Web3 components?
Yeah. So specifically, the graph initiative, or the core unit that would be formed, so currently has been put on hold. We are still talking to the graph, looking for a potential reset of that. So it's yeah, it's not quite scrapped yet, but it does require a full reset. So we'll see what comes out of that. The other element, I think, is encouraging others to do this, right? I guess the same point I was making with Marcom. So we, as SES, of course, we can't do the nitty-gritty ourselves of all these things. There's way too much work, but we can encourage others to work on it. And I think that's the point where the DAO performance dashboard will have a potential role, because if we want to in some way improve the quality of the DAO infrastructure, social or technical, The first step should always be to make the current status visible and then basically push people in the direction of improving these metrics. And so for this dashboard, what we will do is we will set up interviews with delegates, and we'll be very happy to talk to you as well, to ask you all what you think are important metrics to follow and to include in this this performance overview of the DAO. And I'd definitely like to see a number of metrics around decentralization. And I think that's a very good idea to include those in the dashboard. So that's another way that we can contribute there. I'm not entirely sure if the three tracks that we currently define, so legal, community, and auditing and quality control, if they directly would include a core unit that works on decentralization, maybe on the legal front, and that of course separate from IT infrastructure, but legal decentralization is just as important. But yeah, there are the bounties. There are, of course, there is always the possibility of individual contributors and core units joining through other means. And as I said, like we will definitely help to do the audit and quality control to push it in that direction.
Cool. I look forward to seeing that. And last question, and I'll definitely want to have any follow-ups. How does SES? How do you guys, when incubating a new core unit team, how do you guys? And this goes back to tracking individual core unit team members' performance. How do you guys sort of get perhaps the facilitator or one of the key players within the new Incubate core unit to make sure that new hirees within that core unit, right? For example, CES, right? They came in with a couple of individuals only, and now they're looking to hire more individuals and grow that team to 10 members. But how do you get their mindset to think about how they can get the most out of a new hire, right? Because your first slide talked a lot about the centralization aspect of scaling a new startup or a new company. And one of the things that centralized companies do very well is that they try to get the most out of a new hire. And I was wondering how SES thinks about that when incubating a new future core unit. Hopefully that makes sense. And thanks again. No more questions.
Yes. Makes absolute sense, and this is something that follows the same pattern as many of the other competencies that are needed to create your own core unit as a facilitator. And this pattern is really that as SES within the incubation program, we can train these facilitators, we can train the teams to put the basic structures in place. But of course, we cannot be specialists in every possible field. So when it comes to performance reviews of individual team members, that's actually one of the reasons that we think that the Maker Talent Core Unit can play a very important role when it comes to onboarding and the further retention and organizing of the workforce. So the way I would imagine this would work is that the Maker Talent Core Unit can support creating a framework of best practices, recommendations that would be made to the different facilitators. So that's step one. Step two would be that we leverage, for example, the Maker Academy and the SES incubation program to create these high quality educational materials to make sure that these best practices, they are optimally conveyed to the different facilitators, that they have every opportunity to learn about them, to understand why they matter and how they would function, and then create the transparency and make sure that it becomes visible which core units are following these best practices and which core units are not following these best practices. And I think it's important to to maintain a high level of autonomy within the decentralized environment. So I think there will absolutely be core units who may be just starting out, maybe have a more junior facilitator who won't immediately apply very rigorous frameworks. But as these core units evolve and improve over time, I think if we have that infrastructure in place that on the one hand offers the learning opportunity, on the other hand makes progress visible, makes performance visible by letting us know which best practices are followed where, that would be the optimal environment to maintain that autonomy on the one hand. On the other hand, incentivize facilitators to apply those best practices. I do wonder, we have Mariano on the call from the Maker Talent core unit. So maybe Mariano, I'll give you the opportunity to unmute and add something if you want to.
Hello,
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, Mariano, go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And there's also one thing that I would like to add, which is sometimes we have core units where there are special people inside that could also lead projects that we have in the pipeline. And that is super interesting. So there are many strategies to cover the challenge in 360. So one of them is, of course, through auditing performance and following best practices. But there are also other things that if we don't pay attention now, that could be a problem for the DAO success in a few years. So we need to find talent also internally. We need to make sure that we are auditing performance, and at the same time, we need to create bridges for people that are particularly talented, but not yet in the blockchain world. And this is something that should be done not only offline, but also online. That means going to events, that means meeting people, that means open to Asia Pacific. There's a lot of talent out there, and we are a DAO that is very Europe-centric. And there are many opportunities out there when it comes to talent that we need to create. And yeah, this is my vision. And when it comes to Maker Talent, we are building different strategies to cover them all. Of course, there are priorities, but I believe that all the DAOs and all the let's say, communities are growing that fast that soon we're not going to have enough talent pools to cover all the needs that we have. So it's also important to bring people to the blockchain sphere. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariano, for that reaction. Are there any other questions or comments at this point? If you have a question or comment, either raise your hand or put it in chat and we'll give you the opportunity to unmute. If not, then I hope that everyone enjoyed the presentation. I hope it gave a good overview of our thinking for 2022, and going by the reactions in chat, see a few people excited, so that very happy to see that. I hope that the rest of the DAO will be equally excited. We thank you all for joining and see you again next time.